she is absolutely an incredible person. Tanya knows that for every one person addicted, 5 people are impacted. We're going to get into a lot more of that here in just a second, but welcome to the show, Tanya Gioia.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I was just listening to some of your great episodes, and I'm like, everybody should just go listen to this.
Oh, thank you. It's always so nice to have a fellow podcaster just appreciate your work. This is our art form, isn't it?
It is. It is one of those things, when they say, what are you passionate about? What would you do for free? This is what I would do for free.
Where are you originally from, Tanya? Where'd you grow up?
So I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, for the most part. My folks moved a lot, non-military. So I learned from an early age how to go in and make friends and talk to people. I'm not sure it was really showing who I was, but I can connect, and I can do at least that joining in with folks. And as I am moving more into middle age, I need more quiet, which is surprising to me because my energy level comes, I think, from other people. But now I'm learning that no, maybe that's not it. Maybe it was because we moved so much that I had to learn to have that skill.
And I have to agree. I ask people often if they were an introvert or an extrovert when they were children, and if that's changed throughout life. And every now and then I'll meet somebody like you where it seems like that's kind of shifted.
My mother would have said to you, Tanya will talk to anybody, and she talks all the time. And what I'm finding now is I do coaching, and I work online, and I do talk to people most of the day. But I'm finding now that if I don't reserve some time for me, some time to be in the Word, some time to meditate, some time to pray, some time to do that, my family gets a very cranky wife and mom. And they don't like that. And so I'm kind of looking at that going, okay, where do I need to make sure that I've turned off the podcast? I've turned this off. Go for a walk without something in my ears.
Yeah. And it's so important to be able to do that, to recharge yourself and to feel just a little bit more grounded.
Oh my gosh. Oh, and have you ever done a grounding practice?
The only one I've ever done is sticking my toes in the grass and curling my toes and making fists with my feet.
Exactly. So I live in Colorado. We're getting ready for our first snow. I know. I noticed that you were in Denver. So I'm like, we're in the strange time zone together. Mountain time's the strangest time ever. So, we're getting ready to have snow quicker than we're up at 6,000 feet. Well, you're at 5. Getting ready to have snow. So I'm taking advantage of walking without my shoes on, curling my toes, feeling the cold, feeling those things. Because what I noticed was when I get out of the present, that's when the anxiety sets in. That's when the what if thinking, that's when the I'll never accomplish it all thinking comes in.
Yeah, absolutely. What was the trauma that you had to go through that we're here to talk about today?
There's a couple different things. Let's start with the one that I can kind of place as an adult person. So I got married at 23 and then left that marriage. It was a choice between the two of us. We didn't have any kids and left that marriage, and then came out to Colorado to ride for a guest ranch. And I met and married a wonderful man, but I didn't realize the baggage that I was bringing. And I didn't realize how poor I was at picking mates. And I am still married to this person, and we have children together, and we have a life together. But at the time, I was so unhealed from the divorce, from other relationships, and looking back over it, I went, so here's what I would tell people. I'm like, if you're in a bar with 50 good-looking men, I will pick the one who's broke, lives with his mother, can't manage his money, and probably will never have a job. Now, that's not about the man. That's about me. So the person I am married to has his own company, makes money, manages his life, does good work. He wasn't exactly doing that when I married him. And there were some addictions in there that I didn't realize the extent of, all of those types of pieces. So what we did was we took two very broken, traumatized people, put them together like this. And if you've heard of enmeshment theory, we did this enmeshment dance for quite some time, and through the birth of two children, to the point where we got to the point of cops, courts, and chickens. And that rocked my world. So there were restraining orders, there was no contact, there was supervised visitation, there was a lot of stuff. And as I began to look through that, I thought, this is what I see happening in families, and they want to pin it on, okay, if that person, the person who is showing the active addiction, gets well, then everything will be okay. What I completely realized was, even though you can't call me out in you're drinking too much, you're drugging too much, you're using porn, you're doing the, whatever those common ugly plants are, I was flipping crazy. I was controlling. I was to the point of physical violence. I was to the point of, I can't take this anymore, so I'm going to make you miserable and me miserable, because if you're not okay, then I'm not okay, and I can't make you okay, so then we're all going to be miserable. I mean, do you see the circle that's happening in here? And as I began to look at that, got some good therapy, worked with what was going on in my life and how I had had a sequence of relationships like this, I went, oh, this is really your problem. Not that he didn't have his own issues, but this is really your problem. So not only was I coming out of some childhood trauma, I recreated the trauma and traumatized my own children. So talk about just the knife to the heart when you pull all those things together and you look at it and you go, I'm a linchpin in here. I can make some changes. My changes will affect everybody else. And I can either choose to do this or choose to continue to perceive myself as a victim. And I was just done with victim. That, when I realized that's how I was living my life, I went, no, we're not going to be here anymore. And that I truly believe that's a choice that anybody can make. If you go back to Viktor Frankl's work, where he's in a concentration camp, he has nothing. And he says the one thing that humans always have control over is their attitude and how they think about themselves. So that whole shift is what led me into doing this work, because we want to point at the person who is doing the active addiction behaviors, like we do the prodigal son in the biblical story. He wishes the father was dead. He takes the inheritance. He runs off. He does riotous living. He does all that stuff. But the one who really doesn't get it is the righteous older brother. When he comes home, the father welcomes him, and the righteous older brother thumbs his nose at him and said, no, you owe me. This is not cool. There's no love there. There's no connection there. And that's what I was playing out. I was playing out, no, I'm the victim. There was a contract here. You're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. Instead of seeing, and I love when Brene Brown says this, everybody is doing the best that they can. And her husband even says it better. He says, I don't know if everybody's doing the best they can, but it really helps me to believe that they are and to treat them as a human being.
I love that. It helps to break the pessimistic mindset too.
Yeah.
We look around us and we automatically assume the worst of people so often, specifically and especially when we're having a bad day. We're having a bad day, so clearly this person is just a joke.
Well, and it's easy to pin it on them. And the reality is, bad things happen. I mean, look at your own story. Bad things happen. It does happen. What we have control over is how we choose to move through it and how we choose to live the rest of our lives, in the sense of forgiveness of, I am going to drink the poison and hope that you die, which is, when you say it out loud, it's just totally backwards. So I was drinking the poison and hoping that he died. I mean, I was at that point. I'm like, we had a friend die through an accident, and I looked at him and I said, I wish that was you. I mean, how awful can you be? So
you had to make some pretty serious choices.
I had to make some really serious choices. And I'll tell you one of the things, I worked as a mediator in the court system years before all of this happened. And I realized that the court and family law are an oxymoron. The court is not designed to handle that. Contracts, all those types of things, but marriage really is not that kind of a contract. So I had to make decisions on how I wanted to show up, who I wanted to be. Was this something I wanted to salvage? Where was God telling me to be? How did I want to treat my children? And to walk away from this enormous shame that I felt about how I had been living my life. So I could kind of pin all the shame on him for a little while, but then I had to look at who I was, and I'm grateful for it. But I think everybody has to do it at their own level, but it's still that the difference between shame and guilt. So shame is I am bad, which I don't believe anybody's bad, right? So
Yeah.
I am bad. I will always do the wrong thing. I will fail. I am. I don't think we're created that way at all. I think we're fearfully and wonderfully made. Guilt is, I've done something bad. So to step out of my shame, to be able to solve the things that I had done and take responsibility for myself, for cleaning up my area, for looking at what I could change, because as much as we'd like to, we can't control them. And that's where I came to, houses are projects, men are not.
Amen.
And I had been choosing, like I said, I had been choosing someone who was hurting in hopes of trying to heal myself. I'm the only one who can do that. So in listening to that episode, and you asked her, you said, I'm leading the interview for you. You asked her, you said, well, what did you do? I did similar things to what she did. I had built a pretty strong community because my husband was pretty checked out by the time all this happened. I had built a strong community, did a lot of therapy, showed up at extra classes, showed up. There's a one that's not even really offered anymore by Jeff Van Vonderen called Wounded by Shame, Healed by Grace, where he talks about the family systems dynamic and how we come in and we all get a job, and nobody likes to be out of a job, but you can change your job. And I thought, I want to change my job. I don't want to be nagging, complaining, justifying, blaming wife. That's not who I want to be. Certainly not what I wanted to show to my 3 and 5-year-old. Because who am I raising? I'm raising somebody else's husband. And if they married somebody like me, I'd be like, oh, okay, we just need to stop this right now. So this legacy generation really kicked in at that point. I'm like, oh, all of this has got to shift. And it did. With grace, it did. With grace and a lot of hard work. We did tons of therapy. We had living in Colorado. You may or may not know this. The Betty Ford Clinic has a children's program for children who are dealing with parents who are crazy. And you go down there and they make it fun and you have a great time. And what children who grow up in homes where there's addiction don't really understand is you're told, this didn't really happen. You didn't really see this. Don't talk, don't feel, don't share. Right? So what we all began to learn were what feelings really looked like and how you could share and how to have that positive conversation. And my youngest at the time, and struggled a little while longer, facial expressions were confusing to him because what was coming out of the mouth was not the same thing that was happening on the, because if I say to you, Amanda, I really love you. If I say to you, Amanda, I really love you. Amanda, you are so sweet. I just love you. He was so confused. He's like, it's coming out, but I don't know what it really means. So that I highly recommend. And they have virtual now, and they have some books that I always liken it to the Pirates of the Caribbean. And the first Pirates of the Caribbean, which is so long ago now, Jack Sparrow looks at the character, Orlando Bloom's character, and says, your father was a good man and a pirate. So when you're talking about addiction, you can love the person and hate the addiction. So it's separating those two things out and saying, yeah, I'm a good person. I have done some behaviors that I don't ever want to repeat again.
Oh, that's beautiful. What was the most helpful thing?
The Betty Ford Clinic was super helpful. We went through that as a family twice. That was really helpful. They are very good at what they do, especially if you have kids under 14, super helpful. The other piece that I really had to work through was that shame piece. So getting with a therapist, and years later, I did some EMDR, which I would highly, highly recommend to anybody, as well as some somatic work. And then there's a prayer ministry called a Sozo ministry. And Sozo is about being healed, sealed, and delivered. So when Jesus heals the 10 lepers, only one of them comes back and says, thank you. And he is delivered from what in biblical terms you would call the sinful nature. He's delivered from missing the mark on who he is, right? So in the Sozo ministry, it's a prayer ministry where you've got people helping you process through prayer what's going on in your life. And it has been amazingly healing. I've been doing it for the last 15, 16 years. And you can just look at it's SOZO. You can look it up on the web, and there are people all over. I think there are people all over the world that do it. The key to it, if you have no religious background, the key to it is very much like the EMDR in that you're not trying to re-traumatize. What you're doing is going back with your adult self and looking at the scenario and telling that child self or the dysregulated self, we've got this. We can figure out how to work through this. You don't have to live here in your grievance story anymore. That's what it begins to shift. And so the higher power, knowing that you're not the center of the universe and it's not your responsibility to save or heal somebody else, it is your responsibility to heal yourself. That was super freeing.
Have you always been a believer? Did you grow up in the church?
I grew up in the church, walked away, as kind of most people do, somewhere between 18, 20, and
Trying to
stayed
find
away
yourself.
stayed away for a while, went to college, did the things you do in college, picked up the men who had no job, were living with their mother, all those types of things, picked up all those guys. And then as getting married, so I got married in our society relatively late, the second time when I knew I wanted kids at 35. So when he proposed, I said, this is a package deal. we get married and we have kids. This is not an option. I'm 35. I need a baby. We're going to do this. So, as those guys started coming along, I thought, okay, we need structure. But, I had been, in fact, it was my husband who brought me back into the church, really. So that faith piece had always been there. And I in no way think everybody should believe the way I believe. What I am advocating is find something outside of yourself so that you can get outside of your head Because if we think we're the center of the universe, which is highly appropriate for your 3-year-old walking around, right? They are the center of the universe. But get out of your head so that you can see things more as they really are rather than with whatever lens you've put up.
That is such fantastic advice. Did you have any mentors or anybody like that kind of guiding you through everything?
Shoot. I grabbed anybody and everybody who would listen. I'm like, okay, what have you got to offer me? So I highly recommend mentors, and you'll find them in unusual places. So one of the things I say is, who are you not willing to hear Jesus from? Now, when Jesus came, he spoke to the beggars and the prostitutes and the tax collectors, all the people who were unrespectable in his society. So when a lot of this happened, I was already in good community. I was already attending Al-Anon. I had a sponsor. I had, people around me, and I just sunk down into that. So that was super important. Then we started actively looking for, here's what I think people miss, actively looking for couples who had gone through damage like this and come out together. We started having them over for dinner, and we were really candid. We're like, look, we don't get it. So talk us through. How did you overcome this stuff? How did you work through all of this? Actively started seeking that out. Since then, I've done a heck of a lot of personal coaching, have a spiritual director. I still have a sponsor, thank goodness, still show up at Celebrate Recovery. And then we had a delightful opportunity. Celebrate Recovery is a Christian 12-step process that came out of Saddleback Church over in California. And we had a delightful opportunity to be part of the people who started that for the small town we were in. So, you never know anything until you teach it. Kind of like, okay, we need to think a little bit more about what this looks like and what this looks like in our life. So for me, I've always been a growth person, and I love knowledge. I love glomming onto things and kind of sifting through and sorting it out. So, as Zig Ziglar used to say, he got up and he read the Bible and then he read the newspaper because he wanted to know what both sides were doing. So I like to have, okay, I understand this from my biblical perspective. What's really happening out there in the world, especially as I'm raising boys, as we've got a whole lot of shifts happening. They've got a whole lot of things to navigate that I would have never thought about. So yeah, mentor. And I am always looking to learn. And there are people that you would think, not sure they have a whole lot to offer me. Those are probably the ones that have the most to offer you.
Tell me a little bit about I know you have a blog and you've got your podcast. Tell me a little bit about these things. What is your blog about? What's your podcast about?
So the podcast is Sober on Purpose. And what it was set up around was, when we were going through this journey, my husband and I found that people didn't divorce prior to getting sober. They divorced after getting sober. So what happens is, as I talked about earlier, those jobs start to shift and you're like, who are you? I'm not sure I like you. Not sure how this is happening. So it's about thriving in sobriety. And in fact, I've met some other people who hold this concept of there's a sober bottom too. So maybe you have bottomed out and gotten sober. And for me, it's emotional sobriety, relationship sobriety, food sobriety, all those types of things. Maybe you've gotten sober, but maybe you've just switched addictions, or maybe you're wandering around going, I think life was better when I was doing this. So that's what the podcast is about. And we interview all kinds of folks about how their journey went. We look at things from intimacy to boundaries to raising kids, parenting, and what it really means to be in alignment with yourself, alignment with God, and how are you going to show up in the world because of that? Because we're all here for a reason. We're all here and have a purpose. It's when you become purposeless that you begin to grab onto resources instead of going to the source, and you're grabbing onto these resources, but it's like a dinghy with a boat dinghy with a hole in it. It just keeps taking you down and down and down. So that's what that's about. And then can I talk about the summit I'm doing?
Yes.
So the Blessed Family Recovery Summit. Talk about a name that I regret at this point. But the Blessed Family Recovery Summit is happening December 6th, 7th, and 8th. And it is a free summit. It's going to be virtual. We're having all kinds of beautiful speakers come in. There are ones on trauma. There are ones specifically on families and addiction and how families are the best shot that anyone has for long-term sobriety, because you can't pluck them out of the family, leave the family in its dysfunction and PTSD, put them back and expect them to function. So we're talking about that. We're also talking about pornography. That's a huge issue. The availability is huge, and how you manage that in relationships and the difference between intimacy. We're also talking about parenting. I have Lindsay from the Betty Ford Clinic going to come and share some great stuff as far as that's concerned. And then we're going to do women's health. So how brain health affects all of this, have a little cooking show. We're going to it's going to be a good time.
That sounds fantastic. And, just a little tidbit there back on the subject of pornography. A lot of people don't realize that more than 85% of modern pornography is made using survivors of human trafficking like me.
Yes, we talked about that. So I interviewed that guest yesterday. We talked about that. And she said also that people don't realize is that women are 1 in 3. So for every 2 men, there's another woman. 1 in 3. Yeah. No. How does that go? 1 in 3, that would be 4. So for every 3 men, there's 1 woman who is viewing pornography, and we don't realize 50 Shades of Grey could be considered soft porn. Some of the romance novels are like gateway drugs in over there. And what we are not realizing is how it is affecting the family relationship and how it is affecting how the family functions and how the intimacy works, because pornography is not, you don't have to have a relationship. You don't have to, it doesn't require anything from you. It is just an object. Whereas having relationships in the family mean there's a give and take. There's another human there. And like you said, with human trafficking, the more that we support the porn industry, the more that this is going to happen.
Absolutely. So it's that time where I have to ask my very last question. And it's my favorite question. You've listened to an episode. You already know what it is. You know what's coming. But what is one thing that you truly love about yourself that's not related to your physical appearance?
It is really this fascination and curiosity with other people, in the sense of, wow, they do this differently than I do. They have some things to offer over here. It's really interesting to figure out, or to learn, or to sit with somebody who has a different worldview, because I learn an enormous amount. So that curiosity, yes, it can get me in trouble sometimes, but a lot of times it builds that connection. That's what we're looking for as humans, is how do we actually connect with each other? How do we share who we are with somebody else? And then build something completely different, because now we've shared this space. Now we have a new concept that's out in the universe.
If you've enjoyed tonight's episode, please make sure you check out the episode description. You'll find links there on how you can learn more about this guest, links to connect with them on social media, and how to support the podcast. Remember, I don't get paid to do this. My boss is a bit tight-fisted, but I can say that. I work for myself.